Okay, so for anybody who wasn't here last week, we're doing a series on Esther. Same disclaimer I gave last week. This series is a little bit new to me, so I'm just kind of seeing where it goes. I got a little heated last week and we didn't go overtime. I am worried that I am going to go overtime today, so we might not get through all of chapter 2, but I will do my very best. So, last week we talked about how the story of Esther is like drama. There's like backstabbing and divorce and plots and whatever. And so instead of dividing it by chapter, we divided it by act. And the acts are titled by like the key event that happens. So last week, we didn't even finish Act 1. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this entire story because I'm getting too fixated on the details, but I'm going to try as best as I can. So I'm going to try and move fast today. The other thing that we talked about last week is that there is a big part of the story of Esther that is in the like Septuagint, like the Deuterocanonical books, right? And so today, instead of having people just kind of read like all over the place, what we have is the New King James Version, which is what everybody's used to, and then the Septuagint beside it. So that way, whoever I get to read, I'm going to ask them to read both because there are some stark differences between the two of them, and I want to make sure that we touch on those differences. And I want a disclaimer about the differences. So the differences are not necessarily in content. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Deuterocanonical books, what happened was they were added later, right? So the chapters are kind of out of order. And because they were translated into Greek, a lot of translation includes interpretation. So there might not be like an exact word for what it was originally written in. So the person who's translating it had to incorporate an element of interpretation in it as well, which is why sometimes you see a little bit of differences. But it's important for us to know that as we're reading different translations, right? It's important for us to understand the spirit of the story and not necessarily like fixate on the individual words because the words can change through translation, right? So like, for example, like, okay, I generally only pull my Arabic out for comedic relief. So people who are good at Arabic, please don't judge me, okay? But like when you have an expression in Arabic that you can't translate directly into English, right? So the most common one I hear from my mom is "Ma andikish dam," okay? Fine. In English, what is that? You have no blood? Like, it doesn't capture the spirit of what is trying to be said, right? And so that's why when we talk about the Septuagint, I want you to just keep that in the back of your mind, that some of the differences are related to the person who was translating, who had to try and capture the spirit of what was being said and couldn't translate word for word because of stuff like that, okay? Make sense? All right, so let's start. Last week I had people like scrambling on their phones who had the Deuterocanonical books, who didn't. Today I have it up, but it might be a little bit far for you. So let's just jump right in. Who's going to read first? We have a lot more guys today, which is nice. Marina's going to be the runner with the mic so that I'm not sweating and huffing and puffing like last week. All right, don't all volunteer at once. I know this is exciting. Michael! Sucks to know the speaker, eh?
After these things, the king's anger abated, and he no longer was concerned about Vashti, or remembered what he had said and how he had condemned her. Then the king's servant said, "Let beautiful and virtuous girls be sought out for the king. The king shall appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, and they shall select beautiful young virgins to be brought to the harem in Susa, the capital. Let them be entrusted to the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let ointments and whatever else they need be given them. And the woman who pleases the king shall be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so.
Okay, read the New King James Version as well.
I have such bad eyesight, Sarah. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Hegai the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so."
Okay, so for those who were here last week, we left off at king makes, after 187 days of wild partying and drinking, makes a ridiculous decree, okay, that says it's essentially illegal not to respect your husband, okay, turns his domestic dispute into a legal decree, okay, and now he's trying to replace the queen, and so this is where we pick the story up, okay. Before we get started, for anybody who was here last week, what's a eunuch? Just the testicles, not all the genitalia, but yes. Okay, so for those of you that weren't here last week, we talked about a eunuch. So eunuchs back in the day were men who the king decided were safe to watch over the women of the household, so the queens or whatever. And they were only safe because they cut off portions of their genitalia, so they were no longer a risk to that woman. They would never advance to her. They would never do anything that was threatening because they were like half of a man. Do you know what I mean? So women in terms of royalty are often surrounded by eunuchs because they're non-threatening, okay? So what happens here, okay? A few learning points I would talk about. So number one, it says in both translations, when his anger subsided, okay? Or when his anger abated. I want to make a small note here, okay? Later on when we get to, through the story, we get down to verse 16. So last week we talked about how he started throwing the parties when he was in year 3 of his reign, okay? When we get down to verse 16, which you'll see, Esther was presented to him in year 7 of his reign, okay? So halfway between year 3, okay, is when the party started and when he got upset with his wife, and it took him until year 7 to come up with a plan. It took him a long time to cool down. It took him a long time to be level-headed. It took him a long time to come down off of that, emotional high of what happened with his wife, okay? I mean, 3.5 years is a long time, okay? However, the learning point from this is that you never do anything when you're on an emotional high. You never make a snap decision. You never text somebody in anger. Or even if it's not anger, if it's just emotional something, okay? Something that is a change from your baseline normal level of emotions, you never, ever, ever make a decision or make a rash impulse when you're in that emotional state. Because when you do stupid things like what this guy did, where he's going to take his domestic dispute and instead of making himself look like he's the man, which is what he was trying to do, he's going to make it look like he can't handle his household. And now he's going to make it into a legal issue instead of it being a domestic issue, okay? So lesson number 1 that we get from King Artaxerxes or Ahasuerus is never, ever, ever make any snap decisions when you're on an emotional high. The other thing I want to point out about this guy, okay, is that if you look at the 2 translations here, so the New King James, which we're all very familiar with, just says, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed against her, okay? That just makes it sound like he was mad at her, and then he's getting over it, okay? Then you look at the Septuagint, and it says, and he was no longer concerned about Vashti, or remembered her, or what he had said and how he had condemned her, okay? That has a little bit of a different connotation. That makes it sound like he was, pining after her, right? He no longer remembered her, right? He was no longer dwelling on what happened. And the reality was, in that interpretation in the Septuagint, it makes it sound like he was pining after her, okay? At the time, if you remember in chapter 1, we were talking about it, she was the most beautiful person in all the land. And the whole reason why this drama started is because he wanted to show her off because she was the most beautiful woman in all the land. And she was his wife. We don't know how long she was his wife, but he essentially elevated her among the 1,000 billion other women he was around. And so he almost was pining after her. He no longer remembered her, and he no longer fixated on her, and he no longer was picturing her because he wasn't over her, right? And so that emotional high that prompted him to make such a silly decision was a combination likely of anger, but also emotional stuff, okay? He missed her, and she's his wife, and whatever. As interchangeable as women were at the time, when you make a decision to make somebody your wife, it's typically a permanent decision, right? So this is a big deal. But still, same issue as his anger takes him 3.5 years to be able to take the next step. So lesson number 2 for us, don't dwell, okay? Don't dwell. So anybody who's been to like the relationship talks that we do here sometimes knows that I have like an anecdotal, like, it's not like a rule, but like an anecdotal suggestion, okay? When we talk about relationships, we talk about when relationships go badly. We talk about like, you know, you're either in a relationship or about to be in a relationship, things go downhill, and now it's not. It was, and now it's not, okay? And I tell everybody, and I'm going to tell you guys the same way I tell everybody, and again, take this with a grain of salt. Everybody gets their moping period. Everybody gets it. You earned it. You're entitled to it. It doesn't matter how long your relationship or your situation was, you're entitled to it, okay? Because emotions and relationships are messy. So whatever it is, the breakup or whatever happened, you get your 3 days, eat your ice cream, watch your movies, order your pizzas, don't shower, wallow, do whatever it is you need to do to mope, okay? Day 4, you get up, you pick yourself up, and you start moving forward. I'm not saying that on day 4 you're over this person, okay? Because you're not. But there's no way that it is the right thing for you to be 3.5 years later in the same position as where you started, okay? And that's part of the reason why this guy is essentially what not to do, okay? Because it takes him a ridiculous amount of time to be able to do anything. So you get your 3 days, eat your ice cream, gain your 10 pounds, do whatever it is you need to do. But on day 4, even though you're not over this person, you pick yourself up, you take a shower, you go back to work, and you start trying to move forward. You won't accomplish it on day 4, but you better make sure that you're making the first step to moving forward, okay? All right, so now let's get deeper into the story. So all this happens, his anger abates, he's missing her, what everybody says, okay, 3.5 years later, I'm ready. Let's start the original version of The Bachelor, okay? Bring me all the women in the land, and I am the Bachelor. Okay? And I get to choose who's going to be my wife. It's essentially The Bachelor. That's exactly what this is. Okay? Line them up for me like this. And I get to spend time with each one of them and I get to choose. Okay? The Hebrew word used to describe the contestants is betula. Okay? Who's very good at Arabic? What does that mean in Arabic? What? No, that's not what it means. Not that I should be arguing with you because my Arabic is... But like typically, okay, the word betula in Hebrew refers to a young woman of marriageable age. We use the word virgin, okay, in our translations because generally at that time, a young woman who is of marriageable age is a virgin, okay? I mean, like 2020, like no one's gonna make any judgments right now, but at the time, okay, if you're young and you're unmarried, the assumption is that you're a virgin. So that's why that word virgin is used everywhere. But like, it's not necessarily that that person is a virgin. It's just the overarching term that they use to refer to these young women of marriageable age. All right? All right, who's gonna read next? Thank you, Natalie.
The New King James Version?
Yeah, we'll do one and one.
Okay. So in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jar, the son of Shemel, the son of Kish, and Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, who Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Okay. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the capital, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shemel, son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin. He had been taken captive from Jerusalem among those whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had captured, and he had a foster child, the daughter of his father's brother, Abinadab, and her name was Esther. When her parents died, he brought her up to womanhood as his own. The girl was beautiful in appearance.
All right. So there's a few things that happen here and a few details that are included and we're not sure why, okay? So number one, Mordecai's genealogy, okay? Who cares about Mordecai? Why are we going through who's his grandfather and great-grandfather and great-grandfather, okay? Now remember what we talked about at the end of last week, the invisible hand of God, okay? That a lot of times we see a situation like this, but he sees the big picture of a situation. And all these little details that don't seem important at all, okay, he's putting together into a big puzzle of how this is going to work, okay? So Mordecai's genealogy, who cares? Who cares who's his grandfather or his dad or who's whatever, okay? But it actually is very important when the conflict starts to arise, okay? So it says that Mordecai is the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. Does anybody know who Kish is? Okay, so Kish is King Saul's father, okay? King Saul, like the King Saul, okay? One of the things that King Saul failed to do as a king was get rid of this guy named Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites, okay? That was what he was charged to do, and he failed to do it, okay? So at baseline, we know that in between King Saul and the Amalekites, there's conflict, okay? For those that are familiar with the story, fast forward, okay? Haman, the guy who's going to end up being the villain in Act 3 or Act 4, is a descendant of the Amalekites. So we know, if you fast forward to the story, that there is some like conflict and Haman just hates Mordecai, but nobody has any idea why. Well, there is a reason why Haman hates Mordecai, and it's like a long-standing, like ancestral, like bloodbath kind of thing. Because this guy's family tried to get rid of and kill this guy's family, and this guy failed, but not for lack of trying. And so the reason why Haman hates Mordecai is actually a very long-standing conflict. So even though all of these details seem like they're completely unimportant, like it's almost setting the stage to what the conflict that's going to arise, what the purpose behind the conflict is, okay? The other thing, okay, that this genealogy also helps us to realize is that Mordecai is not a nobody, okay? So we talked about last week how they were exiled to Babylon, okay? And first they were taken over by the Babylonians, and then the Persians took over the Babylonians, okay? When they were exiled, the first people to get exiled were the upper class of society. And the reason they exiled the upper class society first is because they want to destabilize society, right? These are the people that essentially financially carry society. And so to destabilize them, you spread them out all over the place, and now there's nobody to carry your congregation, right? There's nobody to carry your people, right? Like, I mean, this is a really bad example, but like, let's say at church, okay? We know that, like, not the most glamorous part of church, but we have to live on donations. The church is not revenue generating, okay? If you take 50 of the biggest donators and you disseminate them to other churches, you destabilize the financial security of our existing congregation. Essentially, you bring us on the brink of collapse, right? And that's what their strategy was when they took over. And so of the first people to get deported were Mordecai's family. So Mordecai is not a nobody, okay? Mordecai is not some like Joe Blow on the street. Mordecai is somebody who has like decent ancestry. He's somebody who is like, I don't want to say educated, but like for all intents and purposes, yes, he's educated, he's upper class, like he has noble blood in him, okay? The other thing, okay, is that if you notice, it says Esther had two names. So she was known as Hadassah or Esther, okay? Likely, part of the reason why she had two names is because she was born in exile, right? Like, you know, like, I mean, again, very, very bad example to give, but like, you know your like Asian friends? They're like Angel or like some Chinese name, okay? This is the same thing, okay? She's Esther, which is like the Babylonian like Bob, okay? But she's also Hadassah, which is her Jewish name, okay? And in order for her to assimilate into society, in order for the Jews to fly under the radar, they have to blend in. And her being named Esther or being called Esther instead of Hadassah is her blending in, right? If she meets the king for the first time and he doesn't know she's Jewish and she introduces herself as Hadassah, that's like a red flag. But if she's just Esther, she's whatever, right? Like, and again, the Asians are a bad example, but if your friend introduces him herself or herself as something that you can't pronounce versus Bob, I mean, physically, obviously, but like assuming you were blind, okay? There's a big difference between their ability to assimilate based on their name or how they identify themselves, right? So, last thing about this passage, okay? If you decide to delve deeper into the translations, there's a little bit of controversy here, okay? In the New King James Version, it says that when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter, okay? And then in the Septuagint, it says when her parents died, he brought her up to womanhood as his own. In some translations, it says he brought her up as his wife, okay? The reason why some translations say wife, but some translations say daughter, is because for all intents and purposes, it was the same, okay? I'm getting some skeptical looks. Let me explain, okay? At the end of the day, Mordecai took her in, and he was her guardian, okay? In the Greek translation, there was no formalized process of adoption. It didn't exist. So they didn't have a word for he adopted her as his guardian. The only way a woman was taken in at the time was as a wife, possibly one of many, right? So the translation alludes to something more than daughter or adoption, but it's because at the time there was no word for that because it didn't really exist, right? But at the end of the day, it's the same relationship, okay? She wasn't intimate with him. He was her guardian. He took care of her. He was responsible for her. And at the time, like with wives, it wasn't that far off. If you take a wife in and she's young, whatever, you take her in, you're responsible for her, you take care of her. Think about St. Mary and St. Joseph. The guy was like ancient, and she was like very, very, very young, but he was her guardian, okay? He wasn't her lover, he was her guardian. He took care of her, he fended for her. She now had a household attached to her name instead of being an orphan, right? So there's a little bit of a difference in the translation, but it's because of the time, not because of like a difference in their relationship. That's gross. All right, next person to read. All right, Marina. So do New King James first and then the Septuagint second. Get out of the way.
No,
8 to 10 or 8 to 11.
yeah.
You can just come up if you like.
Okay. Which verse, sorry?
All of them, like each of the
Oh, okay,
paragraphs.
from the
yeah,
beginning.
the whole thing.
Okay. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and many young women were gathered at Shushan.
Okay, skip the hard names. Skip the hard names.
The citadel, under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, and he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the woman. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. So when the decree of the king was proclaimed, and many girls were gathered in Susa, the capital, in custody of Guy, Esther also was brought to Guy, who had custody of the woman. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with ointments and her portion of food, as well as 7 maids chosen from the palace. He treated her and her maids with special favor in the harem. Now Esther had not disclosed her people or country, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in the courtyard of the harem to see what would happen to Esther.
All right, thank you. So, what is a harem? Does anybody know? I know, okay? I'm getting these like funny looks because there's a lot of implications in this story, and you know what? Get your giggles out, because it's gonna get worse, okay? The next few slides are gonna get even worse, okay? A harem, okay, is essentially a collection of women that surrounded a king or somebody of royalty, and their sole purpose was to have sex with him, okay? Get your giggles out, everybody who's still in elementary school, because we're gonna talk about this a lot, okay? That's what a harem was. So from Mordecai's perspective, this is a disaster, okay? Esther didn't volunteer to be one of the women. They just went out to the country and they poached everybody who wasn't horrible looking. That's it, right? She didn't have a choice. And remember, the Jews are living in exile, okay? They have no voice. They have no strength as a congregation. They have nothing. They are like, I don't want to say enslaved, but essentially, yes, by the Babylonians and then the Persians, right? So for him, this is a disaster. He's her guardian. He's supposed to protect her and have charge over her and take care of her purity and marry her off to a nice Jewish man who's going to propagate many Jewish babies. This is not, a harem is not like what their plan is, right? This is a disaster. But, okay, so I just want to clarify this one part here, okay? So Esther was taken to the king's palace in the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Okay, so this is another eunuch, this guy. So the way they divided the women at the time was there was like, however many women divided into harems. Okay, so it was 50 harems, 20 harems. Okay, and each harem had a custodian. One eunuch that was in charge of keeping these women safe and giving them what they need. Okay, Esther impressed the custodian of her harem. Okay, this guy, Haggai, his nickname is Guy. I don't know, like the translation's a little bit different, okay? Who cares? And she obtained his favor, okay? So it's almost like she was like his favorite. Not in any like sinister way or in any sexual way because the guy's, it's not possible, right? But she impressed him, okay? So is it likely that she impressed him with her beauty? Unlikely. They're surrounded by 50 billion beautiful women, okay? Like, I'm sure she's beautiful, but so are the rest of them, okay? Likely, what impressed him and what made her stand out was her conduct. Because in a world full of Babylonians, okay, a righteous Jew stands apart, right? Similar to our society, in a world full of like moralless people, somebody who clings to their morals stands out, okay? And so she impressed him to the point that he almost like favored her, right? So like he readily gave beauty preparations to her, like, I don't know, like slipped their makeup under the table, like whatever the beauty preparations are, okay? And then he chose 7 maidservants for her from the king's palace, which is not typical for a concubine, right? Like a concubine is nobody. A concubine is a piece of meat, right? But he gave her everything, and it's almost like if this is a contest, right? This is like an episode of The Bachelor. They're pushing for her, right? Like they like her. Like she's their favorite, and now they're pushing to speed her through. So if in his harem, he's supposed to present 50 women, he throws Esther in first, okay? Or if in his harem, he's supposed to make sure all of them get their hair done, she gets the best hairdresser. Because he likes her, he's impressed with her. He thinks that there's something about her that's different, okay? And then poor Mordecai on the outside is just terrified, okay? Like, obviously he can't see that she's being favored and whatever, and at the end of the day, does it matter? She's being favored for what? To essentially become a prostitute. Who cares if she's being favored? She's the best prostitute ever, she's still a prostitute, who cares, right? So he's out there pacing, okay, nonstop because he's her guardian. And he's out there freaking out about what's happening inside and what they're preparing to do and what they're preparing to do to her purity, right? Like, so a lot of the times when we read this story, we think about like Esther. But in the middle of it happening, they're freaking out, right? Like, this is the scariest thing that could happen to them. Mordecai is freaking out that he's not able to protect the purity of this person that he's charged to take care of. How can this be God's plan? Like, for modern day purposes, she's essentially being set up for abuse. She's essentially being set up for rape. Like, how can this possibly be God's plan? Where is the invisible hand of God? Right? Like, read this story understanding what must have been happening in the time. We have the benefit of big picture, right? Because we're looking at it retrospectively. But in the moment, poor Mordecai is losing it, right? He's not married. This is the only person he's ever been charged to take care of, and he's failing. All right, next.
Each young woman's turn come to go into King Ahasuerus after. Did I get it right? Okay.
Yeah, you pronounced that amazingly.
Awesome. After she had completed 12 months' preparation, according to regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation appointed, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared, each woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name.
Okay, I'll stop you there, okay? So I want to clarify what this is, okay? This is, we don't know who the author is of Esther, but this is the author's explanation of what the process is, okay, for these concubines, okay? So essentially, it takes them 12 months to be deemed ready to be presented to the king, okay? 6 months of oil with myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. So they would essentially sit there every day for 6 months immersed in perfume so that it would like infiltrate their skin and they sweat perfume. Okay, that's essentially what it was. So that in no way, shape, or form do they ever smell. That's essentially what it was, okay? And it took 12 months for them to be deemed ready to be presented to the king, okay? And then, okay, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. Whatever, okay? Get your giggles out, okay? In the evening, she went, and in the morning, she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of some guy, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. What does that mean? What does it mean? 12 months, they sit there. Can we turn the recording off? 12 months, they sit there. They're being prepared to go in and sleep with the king for one night. That's what this is. This is worse than The Bachelor, okay? The Bachelor, at least they go for dinner. I don't know. I've never watched it. They do stuff, right? Like go for dinner, horseback riding, something like that. I don't know. I've seen commercials or whatever, okay? This is not that. There's no false pretenses. There's no small talk, okay? 12 months, perfume and oil of myrrh, whatever. You go in, you sleep with the king for one night, okay? Then you leave and you go to a different harem. You go to the harem of the used women, okay? These are the ones that were virgins, undefiled yet, okay? You go in, you have your night, and then you go to the other house, the used house, okay? And you are not allowed to communicate with the king unless he finds you, remotely interesting and he calls for you by name. If your name even left a mark on him, okay? And think about how many of these women this is happening. Like this guy's doing it every day, possibly many times a day, okay? And it's like literally the walk of shame. In the evening, you go in, and in the morning, walk of shame out to the used concubine's house. How is Mordecai not freaking out? How is Esther not freaking out? Right? Like anybody this is not their culture would be freaking out. Absolutely freaking out. So this is the process. This is what is going to happen, okay? Cutie. So good. Sorry, you can tell who has kids and who doesn't, right? Now, okay, I want you guys to read the wording that's chosen for Esther. Now, I'm just going to disclaimer, okay? I am not one of those people that's going to sugarcoat things to make it more Christian, okay? If she had to sleep with him, we're going to talk about she had to sleep with him. If she didn't, I'm not going to sugarcoat, she's in the Bible, so she must be a virgin. Okay? We're going to all be, cognizant of what the times were and what the times mandated that people do. We're not sugarcoating anything, okay? But I want to point out the differences in the language. So the first was describing the process, okay? Now look at when they describe Esther specifically, okay? All right, volunteers. Anyone? Get a guy. Not to put you guys on the spot, but kind of.
Which one do you want?
Do the New King James first.
Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her on as his daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised.
Okay, I'll stop you there. Read the other one, the same reference.
When the time was fulfilled for Esther, daughter of Aminadab, the brother of Mordecai's father, to go into the king, she neglected none of the things that Guy, the eunuch in charge of the women, had commanded.
So just right there, okay, we see in her an element of obedience. Okay, she knows that her situation is brutal. She knows that she has no chance on her own. She's gonna take the wise counsel of the eunuch who's in charge, right? And that could be part of the reason why she stood out to him, because her conduct was different. Where the other women were likely fixated on looking the best so that the king enjoys their night of intimacy, whatever, who cares? Her conduct stood apart from the rest of them. So this guy's helping her, like giving her advice about what to do to make yourself memorable so that she's at least remembered. Her name is remembered, okay? Sorry, go on. New King James, go back to New King James.
And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her.
Conduct, again, okay? Think about her conduct. Sorry, go on, sorry.
So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign.
So that's what I was talking about, okay? So the day she's presented to him is year 7. The party started at year 3, okay? Sorry, go on.
The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king.
Read the Septuagint.
Okay, from the start. When the time was fulfilled for Esther, daughter of Amminadab, the brother of Mordecai's father, to go in to the king, she neglected none of the things that Guy, the eunuch in charge of the women, had commanded. Now Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther went in to King Artaxerxes in the 12th month, which is Adar, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther, and she found favor beyond all the other virgins. So he put on her the queen's diadem. Then the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all his friends, and the officers celebrated his marriage to Esther. And he granted a remission of taxes to those who were under his rule.
Okay. So the contrast between those two sets of verses is the general process versus what happened with Esther, okay? Now, people who don't like to delve into the less appealing parts of our history would say, well, it doesn't say that she slept with him. It doesn't say, right? It doesn't say explicitly that she did, right? I don't know if she did or she didn't. I don't know, okay? What we know is that in the Bible, the term went into means slept with, okay? If a woman goes into a man, that's how they say that she slept with him, okay? We know that the process is that they go in at evening and they leave in the morning. There's a reason why all the moms of girls made them have a curfew, because bad things happen at night, right? There are details in Esther's paragraph, okay, that are left out. Is it possible that she went in and they had a very sparkling conversation and he was impressed with her and he made her queen before anything physical happened? Yeah, it's very possible. It almost sounded like love at first sight, right? The way they describe it. She went into him and the king loved Esther more than all the other women. It makes it sound like he just looked at her and bam, stars in his eyes, okay? So is it possible that he made her queen before anything happened and that she remained a virgin until marriage? It's possible. Is it also possible that the king made her queen after she did what everybody else did? Very possible, because that was the process at the time. The question is, does it matter? Does it matter? If she slept with him before she was queen or she slept with him after she was queen, does it matter? Did God use her any less? Did salvation of the Jewish people come through her any less? Doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter. Who cares if it was pre or post? At the end of the day, she was in a situation that was outside of her control. She was in a situation where there was nothing that she could do. She was in a country where she was enslaved. So does it matter? Is her conduct obviously something that is remarkable? Yes, because it says that everybody who saw her was in awe of her, okay? And she found favor in the sight of all who saw her, okay? And it says it in both translations. So obviously, her conduct was something that stood her apart. Is her conduct what stood her apart to the king? Yeah, that's probably part of it. Does it matter if she slept with him before or after she was queen? No. Was Rahab a virgin? Christ is from the lineage of Rahab. Is she a virgin? No. It doesn't matter. She was a prostitute. Okay, we know what she did for a living. Esther, we're not sure. Rahab, we know. We know what she did. We know she got paid for it. We know. Okay? Does it matter? It doesn't matter. What happened because of Esther and what happened because of the way God used Esther is not at all taken away from by whether it happened pre or post queendom or whatever. Okay? It doesn't matter. And that's something that we need to understand in our lives when we're thinking about ourselves, our own guilt from the past, and the people that we're around. Okay? Your action is not the deciding point of your life, whether it's good or bad. And the action of person X in front of you is not the deciding point of whether they are deemed worthy to be in your presence or not. What matters is the next part. What matters is what Esther did after that. What matters is what Rahab did after she was a prostitute. Okay? What matters is what you did after whatever, okay? Then what? Because the action doesn't matter. I remember when we used to do the relationship goals, everything always comes back to relationship goals, right? But we used to always ask me, if you are talking to people and the girl or the guy, whatever, tells you, I'm dating this person, and I found out that they're not a virgin, would you tell them to break up? I can't tell you how many times I get asked this question. I hate that question. Okay? Obviously, we are a very we're a sheltered society, we're very conservative, rightly so, okay? Remember that whole thing about conduct setting you apart from the world? Yeah, rightly so, okay? But who am I to sit there and say this decision that you made, this mistake that you made, now defines the rest of your life and your prospects for the rest of your life? Who am I? Okay? If God has erased it in heaven, who am I to sit there and retrace it back? I don't know. When they ask me that question, I'm like, I don't know. What kind of person is he or she? And they're like, oh, they're great. Okay. I don't care what they did. If it's not virginity, it's going to be something else. You can ask me that about anything that they've ever done. I don't care. What kind of person are they? What do they do now? Is he a leader? Does she empower you to lead? Yes or no? Those are the questions that I want to hear, but I don't care what they did. It's the same thing with Esther and with Rahab. Does it matter what they did? No. All that matters is what happened next. What's the follow-up to that? We really should turn the recording off. I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for this one. So, lesson number 3 was, okay, check yourselves, okay? It's not about the action. It's about then what, okay? The other point I want to make, okay, so we can all agree that King Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes or whatever you want to call him, depending on your translation, is a little bit of a scumbag, okay? He's a little scumbag. 180 days of drinking and partying and getting drunk, okay? Wife won't come out naked in front of a bunch of gross, ugly men, and he essentially fires her. A little bit of a scumbag, okay? And then creates his own version of The Bachelor and sleeps with different women every single day for who even knows how long, okay? Got a little bit of scumbag, okay? But for the scumbag, okay, for this dirty, gross old drunk, okay, the women had to prepare themselves for 12 months to go meet the dirty, gross old drunk. Okay, 12 months. This guy, King, is a huge boost, okay, for if that's what we're gonna call him. 12 months, okay? What do we do to meet the king? These women were literally sitting in a pool of Dolce & Gabbana light blue, okay, for 6 months. What do we do? What do we do? Okay? How do we prepare for our time with him? okay? I'm not reading this book. I'm listening to all these sermons and whatever about public list. Hopefully I'll start reading the book that I'm trying to read. I've been trying to read it for like 6 months, okay? He always used to say, spend your day preparing for your nighttime prayer. What does that even mean? How do you prepare for a prayer, okay? But he has such a point because your prayers are so much more fruitful if there is preparation that goes into it, okay? And it's the same with a husband and wife, okay? This is a very crass discussion that we're having. We're talking about a lot of crass things. Let's just keep that momentum going, okay? Husband and a wife, okay? Husband comes home from work, assuming that the wife is a stay-at-home mom. I'm living in the 1930s, okay? Comes home from work, hasn't talked to the wife all day. Where's my dinner? I'm hungry. Wash my feet. These Sayed people, right? All that stuff, okay? Zero communication. And then, evening hits. You wanna come upstairs? That's not how it works. Habibi, that's not how it works. It's not a light switch. You can't just turn it on and off. If you're in a functional relationship, not like this dirty scumbag, okay? There is a preparation to intimacy, right? A bit of flowers, you look so nice, anything, whatever, okay? Whatever your thing is in your relationship, there's preparation. You don't just walk in the door and flip on a light switch and say, let's go upstairs. That's not how it works. Like, there has to be some emotional connection. There has to be something that connects you two before you can make that jump into intimacy. Why is prayer any different? How can you expect to go 20 hours of silence, and the second you need something, why isn't my prayer on fire? Why can't I hear him? Why is he not talking to me? I'm praying, he's not answering. That's how a relationship works. If you think about it in the context of any relationship in front of you, forget intimacy, friends. That's not how it works. There has to be a precursor. There has to be like a connection. We did that whole series about like falling in love with him. It's not like you just go from zero to hero. There's like, the noticing period and then the dating period. And he's trying to get your attention. It's the same thing. So you come back from your unfruitful prayers with God and you're upset with him. You should be upset with yourself because you walked in and you treated him like he's a piece of meat. That's not fair. There's a difference in how you need to prepare for something with that magnitude. This scumbag got 12 months of preparation. What does he get? He's worth a lot more than this scumbag. So I'm very old school, okay? Very old school. I shouldn't talk about this today because I might break my own rule today. But with my daughter, I'm also very old school, okay? So like people roll their eyes at me when I say stuff like this. But like if you ask Millie, like, Millie, what are we gonna wear to church today? She'll never pick a tank top. Okay? Not that I think that there's anything wrong with your arms, okay? Show your arms, it's fine. Nobody's gonna like accost you because you're showing your arms, okay? But what I'm trying to teach Millie by the difference in that 2 inches of material, and for Millie's so small, it's like 1.5 inches, okay? Is not about what you're showing. It's about the difference in how you have to present yourself when you're coming to church versus when you're coming to the world, okay? When Millie's out in the summer, whatever, is she wearing tank tops? Yeah, she's wearing tank tops. I'm not a prude, okay? She's wearing tank tops. But it is an inconvenience for us to try and find her something to wear to church, myself included, that has a sleeve. And it's that inconvenience that I'm capitalizing on. Because Millie, I want you to know that it is harder for you to find something to wear that is different than what the rest of the world gets to see you in. Because he deserves that. He gets that preparation. And it's the same thing for me, okay? I'm old school, okay? I'm from a very old school church, okay? This was not even a discussion when I was growing up. But now I can go to any church I want. Nobody's gonna say anything to me if I wear sleeveless. Who cares? I'm married. I'm old. Who cares? Nobody cares about my 2 inches of my arms, okay? But it's not about that. It's about the preparation. It's about going and trying to find something as uncomfortable as it is or as inconvenient as it is that is appropriate to prepare. It is about like making the extra effort and remembering why you're making that effort because this is different. The way you prepare for this is different than the rest of the world. Millie can go to any store and pick up whatever and they all look the same, but it's different. And he gets something different. And he gets something that is more effort, more inconvenient, and requires more thought because there has to be preparation. There has to be some thought put into anything before you're going to meet him because he not even deserves that. Like it's preposterous to even say deserves because it's so much more than that. It's not about the actual like 2 inches. It's about what happens in your mind in trying to avoid that 2 inches. It's that extra mile you're gonna go. You think God cares if you have a veggie burger or a meat burger? No, they're both delicious. Who cares? Some people are vegetarians. That's great. Who cares? The difference is the inconvenience that you put to yourself. I hate veggie burgers, so I'm gonna eat this because in my mind, he's on the forefront of my mind, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's not about what you're physically digesting in your body. Nobody cares. It's about the thought that happens in the background. It's the same thing with clothing, at least for me and my daughter, right? So I read this example, okay, of a monk. And he was this young guy. He wasn't a monk yet. He was like this novice or whatever. He was this young guy, and he was asking like advice from somebody who actually ended up being quite a important bishop, okay, about how can he make his prayers more fruitful. So what the senior told him was keep a diary, okay? In your diary, every time you pray, write what time of the day you prayed, how long you prayed for, and like what your prayer was about, okay? And if you, obviously it's not supposed to be seen by everybody, but now it's published and preserved, right? So if you read through it, it's like, okay, day 1, 5 a.m., so tired, didn't pray that much, 5 minutes. 7 a.m., 20 minutes, not so bad, but still not amazing. 12 p.m., 45 minutes, really hungry though, so couldn't really focus, okay? 5 p.m., really quick on my drive to whatever, 7 p.m., 2 hours, fire, okay? And then you go to the next day, 5 a.m., 5 minutes, 1 p.m., 2 minutes, 7 p.m., 10 minutes, 0 useful. And then you go to the next day, 5 a.m., 7 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 p.m., 12 p.m., 8 p.m., fire. What's the common denominator? Frequency. What's the common denominator? Preparation. Because the first time you talk to him isn't at 7 p.m. The first time you talk to him is at 5 a.m. when you open your eyes. And then again every hour, every 2 hours. And I'm not saying that everybody in this room has to sit there and pray every hour, set an alarm. I mean, it would be helpful, but like, we all have jobs. We know that that's not rational. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it can't be 0 to hero. It can't be out of the blue, 0 preparation, and you're expecting like mountains to move. That's not how it works. If it doesn't work in an earthly relationship, why do you think it's gonna work up there? Okay, I'm gonna just see what I can speed through because I'm cognizant of the time, okay? I always do this, I always run out of time. Okay, last point I'm gonna make and then I'll speed through the rest, okay? Can I get someone to read these 2 parts right here? Don't all jump at once. Thank you.
When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had changed her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai, as she was brought up by him. Meanwhile, Mordecai was serving in the courtyard. Esther had not disclosed her country. Such were the instructions of Mordecai, but she was to fear God and keep his laws, just as she had done when she was with him. So Esther did not change her mode of life.
Wait a minute. Serious? No way, Mabruk. Okay. This is the last thing I'm gonna make, and I have to skip the rest. I knew this was gonna happen. I knew I was gonna run out of time because Esther, there's too many details, but like I'll try to pick it up next week. We're gonna have to shorten this series. I'm not gonna be able to get through everything. Okay, so it says, when the virgins were gathered together a second time, he's already made Esther the queen. Why is he gathering virgins together a second time? Because he's a scumbag. It's just gross, okay? So Esther's his wife, Esther's the queen, but that doesn't mean that he has to stop doing what appeared to be a great idea for the last 6 months. So maybe she's number 1, okay, of the people that he sleeps with, but she's not the only one. Okay, he's gross, he's just gross, okay? So at this point, Esther had not disclosed that she's a Jew. She had not. And Mordecai had told her, don't do it. We don't know how they're going to react. The Jews here are nobody, okay? We are not a desirable people. We are not an esteemed people. Don't say anything. To keep yourself from getting killed, fly under the radar, okay? But, okay? Esther had not disclosed her country. Such were the instructions of Mordecai, but she was to fear God and keep his laws, just as she had done when she was with him. So Esther did not change her mode of life. That right there is an example of the conduct. I remember getting asked one time, like, why do we talk about Esther? Like, I mean, she didn't do that much. She just went to ask the king a question and whatever, okay? That right there is what she did. In the middle of a palace, she's the queen, feast being thrown for her. Esther did not change her mode of life. Why? Mordecai told her not to reveal her heritage, okay? But what is her heritage? Is it that she's Jewish? False. Her heritage is that she is to obey God and to keep his commandments. That's her heritage, okay? Nobody cares what it's called. Nobody cares what the name is. Her heritage is to fear God and keep his laws. That's her heritage, okay? What is your heritage? Okay, people get mad at me because I never identify as being Egyptian, okay? If I'm at work and I hear there's like some Egyptian doctors at my work and some whatever patients, I just pretend like I don't understand what they're saying. I just keep going because I don't like to identify as being Egyptian. I see the judgment looks, I see you, okay? So I was born in Canada, I have very little like connection. I've never been like, I'm not into that, okay? Being Egyptian is not my heritage, okay? Being Canadian, which I actually identify in Canada Day in my house is like Christmas, okay? It's not my heritage. What is my heritage? To fear God and to keep his commandments. That is my heritage, okay? And that is what Esther did not change. You can call her whatever you want. Call her Hadassah, call her Esther, call her Bob, call her Sue Young, who cares? Her heritage is what she did not change, which is to fear God and to keep his commandments. What is your heritage? How strongly do you keep to it? Depending on where you are, or me, okay? I work in a city where swearing is like, they're like truckers. They swear left, right, and center. Like, you could be sitting in the thing with the CEO of the hospital, and it's just like, it's crazy. It's a culture where I work, okay? What is my heritage? What is my heritage? Nobody actually at work, it's highly debated what country I come from. Some people say India, some people say Portugal, and I never say anything. I like to keep the air of mystery, okay? I never say anything about my age or where I come from. I never say anything. And it is highly debated. Who cares? What is my heritage? Okay? When people come into my office and they know I don't swear and they start dropping F-bombs, lately it's, sorry, Sarah. F, sorry, Sarah. Because what is my heritage? It's not where I come from. It's my conduct. It's what I do. It's do I fear him and keep his commandments? Yes or no? And so Esther was in the worst possible situation. She was in the worst possible situation to be like a good Jew. But Esther did not change her mode of life. Because what is her heritage? All right, I'm gonna stop there because I can see that I'm over time. I'm trying to see how much I have left for next week. It's not that much, it's like 2 or 3 slides. So I'll try and pick it up next week. All right, and we'll talk about how long this series is gonna go because it's getting out of hand. This is what happens when I just run with it. So I'll let you know. I'm not sure how many more weeks it is.
3 or 4? 3 or 4.
No, I won't do more than 4 for sure.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. So happy to see you all today. So many new faces. Very exciting to have OnRoute back. So yeah, we do this pretty much every Sunday from 12 to 1. 12 we start the talk, so come a little bit early for some coffee and, to socialize, meet some new people. And if you've missed last week's talk, it's already uploaded on YouTube. All the last series are also on YouTube, on the SMSV YouTube channel from years ago. So if there's any series that you want to, catch up on, or if there's a topic that you would like us to actually start at OnRoute, just let us know. Let Sarah, myself, or Abuna know, or email us. Just send an email to onroute@smsv.ca. And if you're not on our mailing list, also let me know, and I will add you to our mailing list. We just send 1 email per week, and it's just updates and knowing what's next and what's happening, and if there's any cancellation or any unforeseen circumstances. That's all.